The contract arrived on a Tuesday, sealed in blood ink and smelling faintly of old stone, and Roslyn Fletcher knew before she opened it that this one would pay enough to keep her comfortable for a year. She sat in her cramped studio apartment, the city humming 20 stories below, and broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. The parchment inside was genuine vellum, expensive and archaic. Most of her clients communicated through encrypted emails now, but the old ones, the really old ones, still preferred tradition. Cursebreaker required, vampire court, discreet, 4 weeks maximum. Name your price. The signature at the bottom was a single initial in a language she recognized as Proto-Slavic. Beneath it, coordinates to an address in the city's oldest quarter where buildings crouched against one another like conspirators and streetlights barely penetrated the fog. Roslyn pulled out her phone and typed a figure that would have made her mentor choke. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came in 30 seconds. Accepted. Tonight, midnight. She should have known then that this job would be different. No negotiation, no questions about her credentials. Just acceptance, immediate and absolute, as though he'd been waiting for her specifically. The address led her to a building that shouldn't have existed, a Gothic mansion tucked between 2 glass and steel towers, invisible until you knew exactly where to look. Protection wards shimmered in her peripheral vision, strong enough to turn away anyone without an invitation. The door opened before she could knock. The man standing in the entrance hall made her breath catch, and she hated herself for it. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in black that seemed to drink the light. His skin was bone white, luminous in the darkness, and his hair fell past his shoulders in a cascade of silver-white silk. His eyes were the color of winter twilight, cold and ancient and entirely fixed on her. Miss Fletcher. His voice was like velvet dragged over stone. I am Casimir Mortlake. Please, come in. She stepped inside, keeping her expression neutral, professional. She'd worked for vampires before. She knew how to handle their particular brand of magnetism. Let's establish ground rules, she said, setting her bag down in the marble foyer. I'm here to break a curse. I work alone. I don't answer questions about my methods. Payment is half up front, half on completion, and I'll be gone within the month. Something flickered in his eyes, amusement maybe, or curiosity. You are very certain of your timeline. I'm certain of my abilities. She met his gaze directly. Now, tell me about this curse. He led her through corridors lined with paintings that predated the Renaissance, past rooms filled with furniture that belonged in museums. The mansion was a labyrinth, much larger inside than physics should have allowed, ancient magic, the kind that bent space itself. His study was all dark wood and leather, shelves climbing to a ceiling lost in shadow. He gestured to a chair by the fireplace, but remained standing himself. The curse was placed 3 centuries ago, he said, by a witch whose name I have long forgotten. The details are tedious. It prevents me from experiencing warmth, physical warmth. Fire, sunlight, another's touch, all feel like ice to me. Roslyn frowned. That's it? You sound disappointed. I sound confused. That's barely a curse, more of an inconvenience. She pulled out her notebook. There has to be more. Curses of that age usually have deeper roots, psychological components, spiritual anchors. I assure you I have lived with this for 300 years. I know its parameters intimately. And yet you're only hiring someone to break it now. She tapped her pen against the paper. Why? He was silent for a long moment. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows across his pale features. Perhaps I've grown weary of the cold, he said finally. She didn't believe him, but she nodded anyway. I'll need to examine you. Map the curse's structure. It'll take a few days just to understand what we're dealing with. You may have whatever time you require. I'll need a workspace, somewhere quiet with good light. The east wing is unused. Take any room you like. He moved toward the door, then paused. You will stay here, of course, as guest quarters are prepared. I have an apartment, which is an hour away in traffic. This is more efficient. It wasn't a question. Roslyn considered arguing, but he was right. She nodded curtly. Fine. But I work odd hours. Don't expect me to keep to any schedule. I am a vampire, Miss Fletcher. I also work odd hours. Was that humor in his voice? She couldn't tell. His expression remained impassive, controlled, giving nothing away. He left her then, and she spent the next hour choosing a room in the east wing, a library with floor-to-ceiling windows facing away from the sunrise. Perfect. She unpacked her supplies, silver instruments, crystals charged under various moons, herbs both common and extinct, and the worn leather journal containing every curse-breaking technique she'd learned or invented in 10 years of work. She'd started this career by accident. A roommate in college had been hexed by an ex-boyfriend, and Roslyn had discovered she had a knack for unraveling malicious magic. Word spread. Soon she was taking commissions, then going professional, then making enough to quit her day job. She'd learned early to keep things transactional. Do the work, take the money, move on. No friendships, no entanglements, no staying in one place long enough for roots to form. It was safer that way. Lonelier, maybe, but safer. She found Casimir in the same study the next evening, reading a book so old the pages crumbled at the edges. He looked up when she entered, closing it carefully. "I need to run diagnostics," she said without preamble. "It'll feel invasive, like someone rifling through your memories." "I have many memories. Help yourself." She pulled a chair close to his and withdrew a small crystal from her pocket-clear quartz, attuned to her specific magical signature. "Give me your hand." He extended it, palm up. His skin was cool and smooth, flawless as marble. She pressed the crystal to his wrist and closed her eyes, letting her consciousness sink into the curse's structure. What she found made no sense. The curse was there. Yes, a thin filament of magic wrapped around his essence like spider silk. But it was weak, fraying, barely functional. A curse that old should have been embedded in his very soul, roots driven deep. This one was surface level, cosmetic almost. And beneath it, something else, something vast and cold and achingly empty. She pulled back so fast she nearly dropped the crystal. Casimir watched her with those winter eyes. "What did you see?" "Your curse is dying. Another decade, maybe 2, and it would have faded on its own." She set the crystal down carefully. "You didn't need to hire me at all. And yet I did." "Why?" He stood, moving to the window. Outside, the city glittered in the darkness. 1,000 lives lived in buildings made of light and glass. "I have ruled this territory for 500 years, he said quietly. "I have subjects who come to me with their disputes, their problems, their petty grievances. I have advisors who think I don't notice their schemes for power. I have a court that gathers every new moon to drink wine and pretend we are still the fearsome creatures humans once worshipped as dark gods." He pressed one hand against the glass. "I am surrounded by people constantly, and I am always alone." The confession hung in the air between them. Roslyn's chest tightened. She recognized that particular shade of isolation, had felt it herself in countless hotel rooms, temporary apartments, places she never stayed long enough to call home. "You hired me for company," she said slowly. "I hired you because you are the first person in a century to look at me and see a problem to solve, not a king to fear or flatter or manipulate." He turned back to her. "Is that so terrible?" It should have made her angry. She should have walked out, contract void, professional integrity intact. Instead, she found herself saying, "I'll still break it. The curse. You paid for a service, you'll get it. Even though it's unnecessary?" "Especially because it's unnecessary." She smiled despite herself. "Consider it throwing in a free window repair when you called me about the roof." Was that relief in his expression? It vanished too quickly to be sure. "Thank you, Miss Fletcher." "Roslyn. If I'm going to be here for a month, you might as well use my name." "Roslyn." He said it carefully, as though tasting the syllables. "Then you must call me Casimir." The work itself was straightforward. She spent her days researching the curse's origins, tracking down references in books Casimir had collected over centuries. She learned he spoke 14 languages, had studied with alchemists in Prague, had once owned a vineyard in southern France. He offered information freely when she asked, but never volunteered stories, never tried to impress her with tales of his long life. He was, she realized, the quietest person she'd ever met. Not silent, he responded when spoken to, asked thoughtful questions about her work, even made the occasional dry observation that might have been a joke. But he never filled space with unnecessary words, never demanded attention. It was refreshing in a strange way. She found herself taking breaks in the study where he read, working on her notes while he sat in comfortable silence nearby. Neither spoke much, but the silence felt less empty with him in it. "Why do you move so often?" he asked one evening, a week into her stay. She looked up from her journal. "What makes you think I do? You have no photographs, no sentimental objects. Your bag is packed efficiently, as though you're always ready to leave at a moment's notice." He set down his book. "You live like someone running from something." "I'm not running. I just prefer not to stay in one place too long." "Why? Why do you care?" "Because I'm curious about you." He said it simply, stating a fact. "You've spent a week analyzing my curse. I'm spending it analyzing you." She should have been offended. Instead, she found herself answering honestly. "It's easier not to get attached," she said, "to places, to people. I do my job, I move on. Everyone's happier that way." "Are you happier?" The question landed like a knife between her ribs. She stood abruptly. "I should get back to work." He didn't stop her, but she felt his gaze following her out of the room. That night, she couldn't sleep. She wandered the mansion's corridors, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. The place was beautiful in a frozen sort of way, perfect and untouched and lifeless, like a museum. Like Casimir himself, she thought, beautiful and frozen and alone. She found him on the roof garden, a space she hadn't known existed. It was enclosed in spelled glass that filtered sunlight into something vampires could tolerate, dim and blue-tinted, like perpetual twilight. Plants grew in wild profusion, vines climbing trellises, night-blooming flowers opening their pale petals to the false moonlight. He stood among them, his white hair stirring in a breeze that shouldn't have existed 4 stories up. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked without turning. "Apparently not." She moved to stand beside him. "This is beautiful." It was a gift, from someone who thought I needed beauty in my life. His voice was distant. She was right, though I never told her so. "What happened to her?" "She grew old. Died, as humans do." He looked down at his hands. "I attended her funeral and felt nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I had trained myself so thoroughly not to feel that I'd forgotten how." Roslyn's throat tightened. "Casimir, you asked why I hired you now. Why, after 3 centuries, I suddenly cared about breaking a dying curse." He finally met her eyes. "Because I am weary of being cold, Roslyn, not physically. The curse never mattered, but I am so tired of feeling nothing, of being nothing but a king wearing a dead man's face." She didn't think. She reached out and took his hand. He flinched, staring down at their joined fingers. "You'll regret this. Everyone who gets close to me does." "Maybe," she squeezed gently. "Or maybe I'm exactly stubborn enough to prove you wrong." Something in his expression cracked. For just a moment he looked vulnerable young, despite his ancient eyes. Lost. Then he pulled away, stepping back into shadows. "You should rest," he said quietly. "Good night, Roslyn." She watched him disappear into the mansion's depths and knew, with absolute certainty, that she was in trouble. The curse breaking itself took another week. She gathered the necessary components: moon water, ash from a burned promise, silver drawn from a betrayer's coin, all symbolic, all specific. She drew the breaking circle in Casimir's study, careful and precise, while he watched from the doorway. "This will hurt," she warned, "like pulling out a splinter that's been embedded for years." "I've survived worse," she believed him. The ritual was simple, almost anticlimactic. She spoke the words of unmaking, fed the components to the circle's fire, and watched the curse unravel like thread pulled from a tapestry. Casimir stood motionless throughout, his face impassive even as magic burned through him. When it was done, she sagged with exhaustion. Breaking curses always took something from her energy, focus, a piece of herself poured into the working. Casimir caught her before she fell. His arms were strong and steady, holding her upright with ease. She felt his breath against her hair, cool and smelling faintly of old books in winter. "Thank you," he murmured. She pulled back enough to look at him. "How do you feel?" He touched the fireplace, pressing his palm against the warm stone. His eyes widened slightly, the most emotion she'd seen from him yet. "I feel it," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "The warmth. After so long, I'd forgotten." He stopped, his hand moving to cup her face. His thumb brushed her cheek, and she saw realization dawn in his expression. "You're warm," he whispered. "You've been this warm the entire time, and I never knew." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Casimir, stay." The word was barely audible, more breath than sound. "What?" "Stay, past the contract, past the month." His hand trembled against her skin. "I know I have no right to ask. I know you have rules about attachment, about moving on, but I am asking anyway. Stay with me, Roslyn, please." She should have said no, should have reminded him about professional boundaries, about her policy of no entanglements, about the guild's strict rules against emotional involvement with clients. Instead, she kissed him. He made a sound somewhere between surprise and relief, his arms tightening around her. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though he was afraid she might disappear if he held too tight. Then deeper, more urgent, 3 centuries of loneliness pouring into the desperate press of his mouth against hers. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she pressed her forehead to his. "I'll stay," she whispered, "for as long as you want me." "Forever, then." He smiled a real smile, transforming his face into something almost mortal in its joy. "I want you forever." She laughed, giddy with happiness and exhaustion and the terrifying freedom of finally letting herself want something permanent. "Forever is a long time. I have a long time to offer." They stood there in the circle's dying light, holding each other, and Roslyn felt something inside her chest unknot some tight, painful thing she'd been carrying for years without even realizing it. The loneliness, the constant moving, the refusal to let anyone need her or let herself need them. It had been her own curse, self-inflicted and reinforced with every job, every departure, every time she'd chosen safety over connection. And Casimir had broken it without even trying, just by being quietly, stubbornly present, by asking her to stay and meaning it. The guild found out 3 days later. Roslyn's phone rang at dawn, her supervisor's number flashing on the screen. She answered, already knowing what was coming. "You've been compromised." Eleanor's voice was cold, professional. "We've received reports of inappropriate contact with your client. The contract is void. Return immediately for disciplinary review." "No." The word came out steady, certain. Silence on the other end. Then, "Excuse me?" I said, "No, I'm not returning." Roslyn looked across the room to where Casimir sat, watching her with quiet intensity. "I'm staying. If you refuse, you'll be blacklisted. No guild member will work with you. Your reputation will be destroyed." "Then destroy it." She felt wild, reckless, free. "I don't care anymore. Roslyn, think about what you're throwing away. I have thought about it. For 10 years, I've thought about nothing else, and I'm done." She took a breath. "I quit, Eleanor, effective immediately." She hung up before her supervisor could respond. Casimir was beside her in an instant, his hand finding hers. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." She laced their fingers together. "I spent a decade running from exactly this, from wanting to stay somewhere, with someone, and I'm tired of running. The guild will make things difficult." "Let them try," she smiled. "I've got a vampire king on my side. I think I'll manage." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She felt his chest move. Was he laughing? "What?" she asked. "I was just thinking. You came here to break my curse and leave. Instead, I broke yours and convinced you to stay." He pulled back to look at her, his expression soft with affection. "I believe I got the better end of this bargain." "Definitely." She kissed him again, slow and sweet. "Though, to be fair, I think we both won." The months that followed were an adjustment. Roslyn had to learn how to stay in one place, how to unpack all her boxes instead of living out of a suitcase, how to let Casimir see her at her worst, exhausted, frustrated, vulnerable, and trust that he wouldn't use it against her. He, in turn, had to learn how to share his space, his life, his carefully controlled existence, how to let her in past the walls he'd built over 5 centuries of ruling alone. It wasn't always easy. They fought sometimes, usually when Roslyn's instinct to run kicked in and she tried to push him away preemptively, or when Casimir retreated behind his impassive mask, shutting her out without meaning to. But they learned. Together, in the mansion that slowly transformed from a museum into a home. Roslyn set up a proper workshop in the East Wing and started taking freelance cases, curses and hexes that came to her through word of mouth now that the guild had cut her off. It turned out she didn't need their approval to work. Her reputation spoke for itself. Casimir began delegating more of his court duties, trusting his advisors to handle things he'd once micromanaged. He spent more time with Roslyn, teaching her about vampire politics and history, introducing her to his world with careful patience, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mansion filled with life. Roslyn brought home books and plants and brightly colored throw pillows that clashed beautifully with the Gothic decor. She played music while she worked, filling the corridors with sound. She cooked elaborate meals she'd never had time for before, and convinced Casimir to sit with her even though he couldn't eat, just for the company. He, in turn, showed her the city's hidden places, vampire bars tucked beneath old churches, night markets where magical creatures traded in the small hours, rooftop gardens where the spelled glass let them watch sunrises together safely. "I never thought I could have this," Roslyn admitted one evening, curled against him on the study couch. Rain drummed against the windows, and fire crackled in the hearth. A home, someone to come back to. Casimir pressed a kiss to her temple. "I never thought I wanted it. I told myself I was content alone, that needing someone was weakness. And now? Now I know I was a fool." He tilted her chin up, his winter eyes warm for once. "You are not a weakness, Roslyn. You are the first real thing I've let myself want in centuries." She kissed him, deep and lingering, and felt his hand curl in her hair. When they broke apart, she smiled against his mouth. "I love you. I should have said it weeks ago, but I was scared." "I know." He stroked her cheek gently. "I love you too. Even when you organize my library incorrectly and leave coffee cups on priceless furniture." She laughed, swatting his chest. "I organize by subject matter, not publication date. It makes more sense." "It makes chaos. You love my chaos." "I do." He said it simply, sincerely. "I really do." They stayed like that for hours, wrapped around each other, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the city moved on, oblivious. But here, in this moment, they had everything they needed. A year after Roslyn first walked through Casimir's door, they held a small ceremony in the roof garden. Not a wedding exactly. Vampire law didn't recognize human marriage customs, but a binding, a pledge of commitment that meant something in both their worlds. Only a handful of people attended. Casimir's most trusted advisors, curious and cautiously approving. A few of Roslyn's old contacts from the curse-breaking world, friends who'd stayed loyal even after the guild's blacklisting. Roslyn wore a dress the color of midnight, simple and elegant. Casimir wore black as always, but with silver embroidery that caught the false moonlight. They spoke their vows quietly, words meant only for each other, promises of partnership and protection and love that would outlast curses and loneliness and the grinding weight of immortal years. When Casimir kissed her, sealing the bond, Roslyn felt magic settle into her bones, his magic, ancient and vast, marking her as his in a way that went deeper than any ceremony. "You're mine now," he murmured against her lips, "for as long as you'll have me." "Forever then," she whispered back, echoing his words from months before. "I choose forever." The celebration afterward was small but genuine. Vampires danced with humans in the spelled twilight, and for once, the distinction between species didn't matter. They were just people coming together to witness two lonely souls finding each other against all odds. Later, alone in the bedroom they now shared, Casimir held her close and traced patterns on her skin with gentle fingers. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your old life?" "Never." She kissed his jaw, his cheek, the corner of his mouth. "That wasn't a life. It was just existence. This you, us, this home we've built, this is living." He made a soft sound of contentment, pulling her closer. "I spent 500 years convinced I didn't need anyone. That solitude was safety, that isolation was strength. And now? Now I know that loving you is the bravest thing I've ever done." He pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you for teaching me that." She smiled in the darkness, her heart full to bursting. "Thank you for asking me to stay." They fell asleep tangled together, warm and safe, the mansion settling around them like a contented sigh. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect life, never was, but real and full and theirs. Roslyn built a reputation outside the guild as the best curse breaker in the city, maybe the country. People sought her out specifically, willing to pay premium rates for her discretion and skill. She took cases that interested her, turned down ones that didn't, and worked on her own terms for the first time in her career. Casimir slowly opened up his court, making it less of a cold political entity and more of a genuine community. He was still their king, still commanded respect and obedience, but he ruled with more warmth now. More humanity, Roslyn thought with private amusement, though she never said it out loud. They traveled together sometimes, visiting places Casimir had known centuries ago, seeing them through new eyes with Roslyn beside him. Paris at midnight, Venice in winter, small villages in Romania where vampire legend ran deep and true. Everywhere they went, Roslyn learned more about him, the man beneath the king, the person he'd been before loneliness had frozen him into cold perfection. And everywhere they went, she felt grateful. For the contract that had brought her here, for the courage to stay when every instinct screamed to run, for the stubborn, quiet vampire who'd looked at her and seen not just a curse breaker, but a partner, a companion, a love worth breaking 5 centuries of isolation for. "What are you thinking about?" Casimir asked one evening, finding her in the roof garden where this had all begun. "How different my life would be if I'd walked away." She turned to face him, backlit by twilight and flowering vines. How empty. He crossed to her, gathering her into his arms with the easy affection of long familiarity. "I would have let you go. If you'd wanted to leave after the curse broke, I would have let you." "I know." She pressed a kiss over his heart. "That's why I stayed. Because you gave me the choice. You didn't trap me or manipulate me or make demands. You just asked and trusted me to answer honestly. And you chose me." Wonder still colored his voice when he said it, as though he couldn't quite believe his luck. "I chose us," she corrected. "Both of us together. The best decision I ever made." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, pouring centuries of loneliness finally broken into the press of his mouth on hers. She kissed back with equal fervor, her own years of isolation transformed into gratitude and joy and fierce, abiding love. When they broke apart, both smiling, Roslyn took his hand and led him back inside. Back to the mansion that was no longer a museum, but a home. Back to the life they'd built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one small act of courage at a time. She'd been hired to break a curse and leave, professional and detached as always. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for: a place to belong, a person to love, a reason to finally stop running. And Casimir, the vampire king who'd ruled alone for 5 centuries, who'd convinced himself he needed no one, had found his own unexpected salvation in a stubborn curse breaker who treated ancient magic like household repairs and looked at him like he was just a man, not a monster. They'd saved each other, really. 2 lonely people finding warmth in the cold, finding home in each other, finding that the real curse had never been magical at all. It had been loneliness, and together they'd broken it completely. 5 years after that first contract, Roslyn sat in their study, the room where she'd first examined his curse, where they'd first kissed, where so much of their story had unfolded, and smiled at the life they'd created. The mansion was full of light now, even at night, full of her plants and his books, her laughter and his quiet contentment, full of love, tangible and real, filling every corner that had once echoed with emptiness. Casimir appeared in the doorway, 2 mugs in hand. He'd developed a habit of making her tea while she worked, a small domestic gesture that never failed to make her heart squeeze with affection. "Thank you." She accepted the mug, sipping carefully. Perfect temperature, perfect amount of honey. He'd memorized exactly how she liked it. He settled beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn, content just to exist in each other's presence. "I have something to tell you," Roslyn said eventually. He turned to her, eyebrows raised in question. She took a breath, suddenly nervous despite years of certainty. "I've been thinking about the future," Our future, specifically. As have I. His thumb traced circles on her palm. What about it? I'm human. I'm going to age. Eventually, I'm going to die, and you're going to live on for centuries without me. She met his eyes. Unless we do something about that. Understanding dawned in his expression. You want to be turned. I want forever with you. Actual forever, not just my human lifespan. She squeezed his hand. If you'll have me that long. For a moment, he just stared at her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. If I'll have you? His voice was rough with emotion. Roslyn, I have dreamed of this, hoped for it, but I never dared ask. The turning is dangerous, painful, and irreversible. I would never pressure you into it. You're not pressuring me. I'm choosing it. Choosing you, choosing this life, choosing forever. She pulled back to look at him. Will you do it? Will you turn me? Yes. He cupped her face in both hands, his eyes blazing with intensity. Yes. 1,000 times yes. I will give you immortality, eternity, everything I have and everything I am. You will be my queen, my partner, my equal in all things. She kissed him, fierce and joyful. When? Whenever you're ready. He pressed his forehead to hers. This is not a decision to make lightly. Take time. Be certain. I am certain, she smiled against his mouth. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. They decided to wait until the summer solstice, a time of power and transformation. Roslyn spent the intervening months preparing, putting her human affairs in order, saying goodbye to the mortal life she'd leave behind. It was easier than she'd expected. She had no close family left. Her few human friendships were casual, easily explained away with a story about moving abroad. The only thing she'd truly miss was the sun, and even that seemed a small price for eternity with Casimir. The night of her turning, she dressed simply and met him in the bedroom they'd shared for 5 years. He looked nervous, more uncertain than she'd seen him since those early days. Last chance, he said quietly. Once this is done, there's no going back. I don't want to go back. She took his hands, steady and sure. I want to go forward, with you, forever. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. It will hurt, more than anything you've experienced, and there's a chance, a small one, but real, that you won't survive the transformation. I trust you, she kissed him softly. I trust us. We've overcome everything else. We'll overcome this too. He guided her to the bed, settling her against the pillows with gentle hands. His eyes had gone dark, ancient and inhuman, vampire instincts rising to the surface. I love you, he said, voice rough. No matter what happens, remember that. I love you too. She tilted her head, exposing her throat. I'm ready. His fangs pierced her skin with swift precision, and she gasped at the sharp pain followed by strange pleasure. She felt him drinking, felt her life pouring into him, and distantly understood this was how she would die, drained by the man she loved, her human existence ending in his arms. Then he bit his own wrist and pressed it to her mouth. Drink. His blood was cold and sweet and electric, power flooding through her in waves. She drank desperately, clutching his arm, feeling her body begin to change at the cellular level. Bones reshaping, organs shifting, mortality burning away like paper in flame. It hurt. God, it hurt worse than anything, worse than he'd warned. She screamed against his wrist, convulsing, every nerve ending on fire. Casimir held her through it, murmuring words of love and encouragement, his free hand stroking her hair. That's it, love. Fight through it. Come back to me. You're so strong, so brave. Just a little longer. Stay with me. Time lost meaning. There was only pain in his voice and the feeling of something fundamental shifting inside her. Then, suddenly, it was over. She lay gasping on the bed, every sense heightened to impossible intensity. She could hear Casimir's unnecessary heartbeat, could smell the individual components of his cologne, could see every thread in the curtains across the room. Roslyn, his voice was careful, worried. Can you hear me? She turned her head to look at him and saw him truly for the first time, every detail sharp and clear, his beauty almost painful in its perfection. I can hear you. Her own voice sounded different, richer somehow. I can hear everything. Relief crashed across his face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. You survived. You're here. You're vampire, she finished, testing the word. It felt right. True. She sat up slowly, marveling at the strength in her limbs, the complete absence of fatigue. She felt powerful, immortal, free. And when she looked at Casimir, seeing him with vampire eyes for the first time, she felt their bond snap into place like a physical thing, deeper than human love, more profound than any magic. We're the same now, she whispered, awed. We're the same. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. My queen, my love, my eternal companion. She kissed him back, reveling in her new strength, the enhanced sensations, the knowledge that she would have literally forever to explore this with him. They made love slowly, learning her changed body together, and afterward lay tangled in sheets that would never need replacing, because neither of them would ever truly tire. What do we do now? Roslyn asked, tracing patterns on his chest. Now? Casimir smiled, tucking her hair behind her ear. Now we live. We have eternity, love. We can do anything, go anywhere, be anyone. The world is ours. I just want to be with you. She pressed closer. Everything else is details. Then that's what we'll do. He kissed the top of her head. Together. Always. The following decades blurred together in the best possible way. Roslyn learned to navigate vampire society, earning respect as both Casimir's partner and a powerful magic user in her own right. She continued breaking curses, but now worked exclusively with supernatural clients, her reputation growing to legendary status. Casimir flourished with her beside him, his court becoming known as one of the most progressive in the vampire world. They ruled together, complementing each other perfectly, his ancient wisdom tempered by her modern pragmatism, her impulsiveness balanced by his careful consideration. They traveled extensively, seeing the world change around them through immortal eyes. They watched technology advance, societies shift, new eras dawn. And through it all, they had each other. Some nights, usually when they were alone in the roof garden that had witnessed so many pivotal moments, Roslyn would think back to that first contract. To the woman she'd been lonely and rootless, convinced that emotional distance was strength. Do you ever regret it? Casimir asked once, catching the nostalgic look on her face. Your old life? Your humanity? Never. She turned to him, cupping his face in her hands. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. Home, purpose, love, forever. You gave me the same. He covered her hands with his own. I was dead long before you turned me, love. Just walking through the centuries, existing but not living. You brought me back to life. She kissed him, pouring a century of love into it. When they broke apart, both smiling, she leaned her head on his shoulder and looked up at the spelled sky. We broke each other's curses, she said softly. We did. He wrapped an arm around her waist. The best magic either of us ever worked. They stood there together as they had so many times before. Two people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd chosen love over loneliness, together over alone. Roslyn had been hired to break a curse and leave. Instead, she'd stayed. And in staying, she'd found everything she'd been running from her entire life connection, belonging, home. She'd found forever with a vampire king who'd spent 5 centuries alone, who'd looked at her and seen not just a curse breaker, but a soulmate, who'd loved her enough to let her choose her own fate, and she'd chosen him. Would choose him again every single day for all the endless days they had ahead. The curse of loneliness, it turned out, had a simple cure. Love. Trust. The courage to stay when every instinct screamed to run, and someone worth staying for. She had all of that now, they both did, and they had forever to enjoy it.